Ashley Thompson.
And I'm Dan Novak.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Russian forces on Tuesday pressed forward with their weeks-long drive to encircle and capture the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, where the commander of Ukraine's ground forces described the situation as extremely tense. Taking Bakhmut, the scene of some of the war's bloodiest battles, would be Russia's first major prize in more than 6 months, and open the way to seizing the last remaining urban centers in the Donetsk region, one of 4 Moscow claims to have annexed in its special military operation in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered officials to tighten control of the border with Ukraine after a spate of drone attacks that Russian authorities blamed on Kyiv. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
The alleged Ukraine drone strikes deliver a new challenge to Moscow more than a year after its full-scale invasion of its neighbor. One drone crashed just 60 miles away from Moscow in an alarming development for Russian defenses. While Putin hasn't referred to any specific attacks in a speech in the Russian capital, his comments come hours after drone attacks targeted several areas in southern and western Russia, and authorities closed the airspace over St. Petersburg in response to what some reports say was a drone. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
The U.S. Defense Department Inspector General says his office has found no evidence yet that any of the billions of dollars in weapons and aid to Ukraine has been lost to corruption or diverted into the wrong hands.
We're laser focused on this issue and engaged in robust oversight to make sure that's the case. We're doing audits and evaluations that look at the weapons from the time they begin at the port while they're transferred throughout as they get to the transshipment points and then they go into the country.
Robert P. Storch testified Tuesday. This is VOA News. Nigerian opposition groups have called Saturday's presidential election a sham that should be overturned as their supporters protest in the capital. Correspondent Timothy Obuza reports from Abuja.
Nigeria's Electoral Commission, INEC, announced the results of last weekend's presidential elections for a third day. As of late Tuesday, INEC had announced full results from 2/3 of Nigeria's 36 states. The candidate for the ruling All Progressives Congress, or APC party, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, led the race with more than 7 million votes. As more results are announced, experts say tensions may increase across Nigeria. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
A Sudanese protester was killed on Tuesday after being shot in the chest during a demonstration against military rule, the Central Committee of Sudanese Doctors said in a statement. Sudanese police said in a statement the shooting was an individual action that went against orders and that legal procedures had been immediately taken against the policemen involved. The protester, who was killed near Sudan's capital, became the 125th protester killed in weekly protests set off by a coup in October 2021. The TikTok social media app popular with teens is being banned on U.S. government phones and beyond, AP correspondent Norman Hall reports.
The United States is ratcheting up national security concerns about TikTok, mandating that all federal employees delete the Chinese-owned social media app from government-issued mobile phones. Congress, the White House, U.S. Armed Forces, and more than half of U.S. states have banned TikTok amid concerns that its parent company, ByteDance, would give user data such as browsing history and location to the Chinese government or push propaganda and misinformation on its path. The company questioned the ban, saying it has not been given an opportunity to answer questions and that governments are cutting themselves off from a platform beloved by millions. I'm Norman Hall.
1 in 10 early deaths could be prevented if everyone engaged in a small amount of daily exercise, such as a brisk 11-minute walk, a large study said on Wednesday. Physical activity is known to reduce the risk of heart disease, cancer, and other leading causes of death, but exactly how much is needed to have an impact has been unclear. An international team of researchers pulled together the results of 196 previous studies, which included more than 30 million people, to create one of the largest reviews conducted on the subject. They calculated that around 1 in 6 early deaths would have been prevented if everyone in the studies had at least 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity physical activity. I'm Joe Ramsey.
This is VOA News. I'm Diane Roberts. Greece's transport minister submitted his resignation, and a local train station master has been arrested over the deadliest train crash to hit Greece in many years. The man is denying any wrongdoing and has attributed the accident to a possible technical failure, according to government and police sources. Fire officials say at least 36 people died, 85 others were injured, and many more are still missing Wednesday after the passenger train collided with an oncoming freight train in northern Greece early Wednesday. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis visited the scene Wednesday, where he told reporters the government would find out the cause of the accident and do everything in their power to make sure it never happens again. The government declared 3 days of national mourning Wednesday. The Ukrainian president's office reports at least 9 civilians have been killed, around 12 others wounded over the past 24 hours. The Ukrainian Emergency Service rescued an elderly woman Wednesday after heavy shelling hit the city of Chasiv Yar and put her in an ambulance headed to the hospital. Fierce fighting has continued in the eastern province, with around 17 towns and villages coming under intense Russian shelling, as well as Bakhmut and other cities. The office says shelling does not stop along the entire front line. To the south, in the Kherson province, there were deaths and injuries from 9 shelling attacks by Russian forces. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in New Delhi Wednesday ahead of the Group of 20 foreign ministers meeting with the backdrop of the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia said it would use the meeting to tell the world who, according to Moscow, was responsible for the political and economic crisis the world finds itself in. Washington said it was important the G20 continue to call out Russia. This is VOA News. U.S. pharmaceutical giant Eli Lilly announced Wednesday it was cutting the cost of its most commonly prescribed insulins by 70% after years of soaring prices that hit millions of Americans living with diabetes. The announcement comes as the cost of insulin has surged in recent years, with demand increasing significantly as well. U.S. President Joe Biden hails the move, saying others should follow. Diabetes is one of the fastest-growing chronic diseases globally, according to a 2022 study. Iran has tried to deflect responsibility for its violent crackdown of months of peaceful anti-government protests by having its foreign minister give a speech in person to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. VOA's Lisa Schlein has more.
However, there were other ministers, other dignitaries who spoke that day during the high-level segment, and some of them did mention their criticisms. They were rather critical of what was happening in Iran, and when they gave their speeches, they condemned the Iranian government for its repressive actions, for the way it has been arresting and in some cases horribly executing peaceful protesters.
Burkina Faso has scrapped a 1961 agreement on military assistance with France, a move that comes only weeks after it told the French ambassador and troops supporting its anti-jihadist campaign to quit the country. The accord was forged between the newly independent Republic of Upper Volta, as Burkina Faso used to be called, and its longtime colonial power. The move marks a further downward spiral in relations since the military toppled Burkina's elected president last year. The Independent National Electoral Commission declared Bola Tinubu as Nigeria's president-elect on Wednesday, but many people told Reuters they were unhappy with the process that led to his victory.
It's just funny because Nigerians are just doing what they feel like. So for them to declare Tinubu as a winner, let them just go ahead with whatever they are doing. We don't care. All we know that there must surely be a reaction to this. And when it comes, they should get ready to face it.
This is the country that I see, where the INEC declared the man as a winner. But the eyes of court, the man is not a winner.
The electoral process encountered problems because of new technology that did not function well. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan indicated Wednesday that elections will be held on May 14th, sticking to his previous plan for the vote, with a date just more than 3 months after a devastating earthquake killed more than 45,000 people in Turkey. I'm Diane Roberts, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken urged his Russian counterpart to end the Ukraine war on the sidelines of the G20 talks on Thursday. It was their first face-to-face contact since the invasion last year. VOA's Diane Roberts has more.
Officials say Secretary Blinken chatted with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov for about 10 minutes at the meeting of the world's top diplomats in New Delhi.
I told the foreign minister what I and so many others said last week at the United Nations and what so many G20 foreign ministers said today. End this war of aggression. Engage in meaningful diplomacy that can produce a just and durable peace.
Blinken added that the U.S. will back Kyiv as long as needed while working on a diplomatic solution. And there were no signs of progress at the conference, which ended with the 20 nations unable to reach a joint final declaration about the war in Ukraine after objections from Moscow and Beijing. Diane Roberts, VOA News.
A Greek government spokesman says there's been an admission of negligence from the train station master on duty near the site of Tuesday's train collision that killed at least 43 people. The collision occurred late Tuesday near the city of Tempe, about 380 kilometers north of Athens, the Greek capital. It injured more than 80 people in addition to the 43 dead. Rail unions called for strikes Thursday to protest working conditions and a lack of government action to address safety standards for the rail system. The three neighboring countries of Somalia are to send new troops to support Somalian forces against the al-Shabaab terrorist group in the next phase of military operations, this according to the National Security Advisor for the Somali president. From Washington, you're listening to VOA News. Two native Hawaiian men are scheduled to be sentenced Thursday for federal hate crime convictions and the brutal beating of a white man who tried to move into their remote traditional fishing village. VOA's Richard Green has more.
A jury convicted the two men back in November, finding that they were motivated by the victim's race when they punched, kicked, and used a shovel to beat him in 2014. Local lawyers believe this is the first time the U.S. has prosecuted Native Hawaiians for hate crimes. The unique case highlights the struggles between Native Hawaiians who are adamant about not having their culture erased and people who moved to Hawaii without knowing or considering its history and racial dynamics. According to U.S. Census figures, 38% of Hawaii's 1.5 million residents are Asian, 26% are white, 2% are black, while many people are of multiple ethnicities. Native Hawaiians account for about 20% of the population. Richard Green, VOA News, Washington.
American Cindy McCain will take over as executive director of the World Food Program when current director David Beasley steps down next month. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and the Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization released the announcement praising McCain as a champion for human rights with a long history of humanitarian and philanthropic work. McCain is a prominent Republican and a widow of Arizona Senator John McCain. She's currently U.S. ambassador to the United Nations agencies in Rome, which include the FAO and the World Food Program. Washington, D.C.'s cherry blossoms are coming early this year. AP's Ed Donahue has more.
The trees are apparently confused about the changing climate.
Due to the warmer than average temperatures, the trees never reached their winter dormancy, which is the starting point for calculating when the blooms will emerge.
Jeff Reinbold with the National Park Service says the 3,700 cherry blossom trees in the city are expected to reach peak bloom earlier than expected between March 22nd and 25th. The city has experienced dramatic temperature swings. It hit 81 degrees one day last week. 2 days later, it snowed.
Our natural resource manager likened the trees this year, our indicator tree, to a teenager. There's a lot going on there right now.
Washington's cherry blossoms date back to 1912, a gift from the mayor of Tokyo. Ed Donahue, Washington.
Burmese ethnic groups in the United States are urging the Biden administration to establish a no-fly zone over Myanmar and to impose jet fuel sanctions on the country's military junta. A group consisting of several different ethnic groups, Buddhist monks, and young activists from different states across the United States came to Washington recently to participate in a march on the White House. Activists are demanding an end to the Myanmar junta's airstrikes on its own citizens. Marissa Melton, VOA News.